Little girl knocked. They beat my mama. She's dying. What the rancher did shocked everyone. The morning felt wrong, too quiet, too heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then came the knock. 3 faint taps against the old ranch door shattered the silence, echoing through the valley. What waited on the other side wasn't a stranger seeking help. It was fate itself, wearing a child's face. The sun hadn't yet cleared the distant ridges when Owen Callahan stepped out onto his porch, his boots crunching the frost that clung to the earth. He was a man carved by time, broad shoulders, thick beard dusted with gray, and eyes that had seen more loss than joy. The ranch stretched for miles behind him, empty except for the lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind brushing over dry grass. For years, Owen had lived alone on this land. Once it had been alive with laughter, his wife's soft singing as she hung laundry to dry, the shrill giggles of their little boy chasing the dog through the yard. But that was before the fever took them both. Before silence became his only companion, so when the knock came, it startled him. It was small, uncertain, like someone afraid of the answer that might come. He turned, squinting toward the door, and for a moment thought he imagined it. But then came another knock, louder this time, desperate. Owen's heart quickened as he stepped closer. When he pulled open the heavy wooden door, he froze. There, shivering in the cold, stood a little girl no older than 7, barefoot. Her hair tangled, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. The tattered yellow dress she wore was smeared with mud and something darker, blood. Her small voice trembled. "They beat my mama," she whispered. "She's dying." Owen's breath hitched. The girl's words pierced through the walls he'd built around his heart. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the wind moved, tugging at her torn dress like it wanted to carry her away. He crouched down to her level, his voice quiet but steady. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lila," she said. Her lips quivered as she spoke. "Please, help her." And just like that, the lonely rancher who had shut himself off from the world felt something stir inside, a flicker of the man he used to be. Owen didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat, wrapped it around Lila's small shoulders, and lifted her gently into his arms. The air bit cold against his skin, but her trembling body reminded him that time was precious. He didn't even lock the door as he set her on his horse. "Scout, show me where," he said. Lila pointed with a shaky finger toward the line of pine trees stretching beyond the fields. "There," she whispered, "past the creek." They rode hard through the morning mist. The frost on the grass shimmered like glass under the early sun. Lila clung to Owen's coat, her small hands gripping tight as if letting go meant losing her mother forever. Every bump, every gust of cold air pressed her fear deeper into his heart. "What happened?" Owen asked gently as they crossed the creek, the horse's hooves splashing icy water. Lila's answer came between sobs. "Bad men. They came last night. They wanted money. Mama didn't have any, so they hit her." She wiped her tears with her sleeve. "I ran. I didn't know where to go." Owen's jaw tightened. There was something about her words, the innocence with which she said "bad men," that tore at him. The thought of any man laying a hand on a woman or child made his blood burn. He'd seen enough cruelty in the world, enough loss. Not again. Not today. The forest grew darker as they entered, the scent of pine heavy in the air. Then Lila whispered, "There," and pointed toward a small, leaning shack at the edge of a clearing. Smoke trickled faintly from a rusted pipe. Owen jumped off the horse before it even stopped and pushed the door open with his shoulder. The sight inside froze him in place. On the floor lay a woman, her face swollen, her arms bruised, her breath shallow and ragged. A broken chair lay overturned beside her, and the smell of iron and dirt filled the air. But when her eyes fluttered open, the first thing she did was whisper her daughter's name. "Lila." Owen knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he murmured. "I'm gonna get you out of here." The woman tried to speak but couldn't. Only tears slipped down her temples as Lila fell beside her, clutching her mother's hand. That image, child and mother bound by pain and love, would stay with Owen for the rest of his life. The woman was light as a shadow when Owen lifted her. Every step back through the woods felt heavier than the last, but he didn't stop. Scout carried them swiftly through the fields, the wind cutting cold against their faces. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had turned pale gold. Inside the cabin, Owen laid the woman gently on his bed. Lila hovered near the doorway, her wide eyes filled with silent hope. He poured water into a bowl, tore strips from an old linen shirt, and began cleaning the wounds. He wasn't a doctor, but his hands, so used to mending fences and tending cattle, moved with surprising gentleness. The woman winced but didn't cry out. "You're safe here," Owen said softly. "No one's gonna hurt you now." Lila clung to her mother's arm, whispering, "Mama, he's helping." And for the first time since the knock on his door, Owen saw the faintest smile flicker across the woman's lips. When her breathing steadied, he asked, "What's your name?" "Ava," she rasped. Her voice was weak, but her eyes, though bruised, still held strength. "Thank you for helping my little girl." Owen looked down at her, feeling something tighten in his chest. "No need to thank me," he muttered. "You'd do the same." But deep down he knew that wasn't true for everyone. He'd seen neighbors turn away from those in need. The world had grown colder, harder, yet somehow this small girl had found his door, and in doing so had forced him to remember the man he used to be before grief hollowed him out. For days, Owen cared for them. He boiled soup, fetched water, and kept the fire burning. At night, when Lila fell asleep by her mother's side, he'd sit by the window staring out at the quiet hills. Something inside him was changing. The loneliness that had wrapped around him for years began to loosen, thread by thread. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: he wasn't alone anymore. By the fourth day, color had returned to Ava's face. She could sit up now, her voice stronger, her eyes brighter. Lila followed Owen around the ranch, asking endless questions about the horses, the windmill, the cows. Her laughter echoed across the yard, filling spaces that had long been silent. But even peace carried a shadow. That evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge, Ava told him the truth. "The men who did this," she said quietly, "they'll come back. They don't like to leave things unfinished." Owen froze, hand resting on the doorframe. "You know who they are?" She nodded. "They work for the man who owns the lumber mill down by Ridge Hollow. He's dangerous." For a long moment neither spoke. Outside, the night wind howled through the pines. Owen turned to her finally. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "If they come, they'll deal with me first." Eva looked at him, eyes glistening. "Why are you helping us, Owen?" "You don't even know us." He hesitated before answering. "Because someone once helped me," he said. "And I didn't get the chance to thank them." Eva didn't ask more. She just reached for his hand. It was rough and calloused, but warm. "Then I hope someday I can do the same for someone else," she whispered. That night, Owen couldn't sleep. He sat by the window again, rifle leaning against the wall, watching the darkness stretch across the valley. He didn't know when the men would come, but he knew they would, still for the first time in years. He felt something he hadn't felt since the day he buried his family: purpose. He whispered into the quiet, "No one's gonna hurt them again. Not while I'm breathing." Outside, the moon hung low and silver, casting light across the empty fields. The wind carried the faint sound of hooves from somewhere far off. Owen tightened his grip on the rifle. It had begun. The next morning came quiet, too quiet. Owen rose early, as he always did, but something about the wind felt different. It carried a stillness that didn't belong to dawn. It was the kind that came before trouble. He saddled Scout, his faithful horse, and rode out to check the fence line, though his eyes kept drifting toward the tree line beyond the fields. He'd seen tracks there the night before, not the kind made by deer or cattle. Boots, heavy ones. When he returned, Eva was on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching Lila chase chickens across the yard. Her face softened when she saw him, but her voice trembled slightly. "You saw something out there, didn't you?" Owen didn't answer right away. He took off his hat, brushed the dust from it, and looked past her to the horizon. "Tracks," he said. 3, maybe 4 men. They were close. Eva's hand tightened on the blanket. "They're looking for us." "Let 'em look," Owen said gruffly. "They'll find me first," she shook her head. "You can't take on men like them alone." Owen gave a small, tired smile. "Ma'am, I've been alone for years. I can handle a few cowards who think hurting a woman makes them strong." But deep down his stomach was knotted. He wasn't worried for himself. He'd faced down storms, wild coyotes, and worse. What terrified him was the thought of losing what he'd just found again: the sound of laughter in his home, the feeling of belonging. As the day went on, he noticed little things: a broken branch near the barn, the faint smell of cigarette smoke carried by the wind. He kept his rifle loaded by the door and a lantern lit at night. That evening, when the sun melted behind the hills, Owen caught sight of something, a reflection maybe from a metal belt buckle, glinting deep among the pines, watching, waiting. He said nothing to Eva or Lila. He just stepped outside, looked toward the trees, and whispered to the empty air, "If you're coming, come soon. I'll be ready." Later that night, Eva woke to find Owen sitting by the fire, sharpening a hunting knife. The flicker of the flames carved shadows across his face, making him look older, more tired. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked quietly, her voice breaking the heavy silence. He didn't look up. "Used to, not anymore. Why not?" He paused, then set the knife down. "Because the worst already happened." Eva's brow furrowed. She waited. He hadn't spoken about himself since they met. Not once. "My wife and son," he said finally. "They got sick. Fever swept through town. By the time I rode to the doctor, it was too late. I buried him out behind the barn. After that, I stopped talking to folks. Stopped caring. Figured the world was done with me." Eva's eyes softened. "I'm sorry," he nodded slightly. "Then that knock came. And there you were, your little girl on my porch. Guess the world wasn't done after all." For a while, they sat in silence, the fire crackling softly. There was something comforting in it, a shared understanding of pain. "You saved us," Eva said at last. "I don't know how to repay that." Owen looked up at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just get better. That's enough." But as he spoke, a faint sound echoed outside, the crunch of gravel under boots. Both of them froze. Owen motioned for her to stay silent. He grabbed his rifle and peered through the window. The yard lay still under the pale moonlight, but in the distance near the fence something moved. A figure, then another. He turned to Eva, his expression hard. "Get Lila, hide her in the cellar, now." Eva didn't argue. She scooped her sleeping daughter into her arms, her heart pounding, and hurried toward the trapdoor beneath the kitchen floor. Owen watched until they were gone, then stepped out onto the porch. The wind cut cold across the land. Somewhere a dog barked in the distance. Owen's finger hovered near the trigger. "Come on then," he muttered into the night. "Let's finish what you started." They came just before dawn. 4 men on horseback, their silhouettes black against the gray horizon. Owen saw the smoke of their breath before he heard their voices. The leader, a thick-set man with a scar cutting across his cheek, dismounted first. His boots sank into the frost as he called out, "Mornin', old man. Heard you got something that don't belong to you." Owen stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, his broad frame blocking the view inside. "Ain't got nothing that belongs to the likes of you." The man chuckled. "That woman and her brat, they're mine to deal with. You hand 'em over, we walk away." Owen's voice was calm, steady. "You touch either of them, you'll be digging your own graves before sundown." The other men laughed, but not for long. When Owen stepped forward into the light, they saw something in his eyes. A stillness that only came from a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. The leader's smile faded. "You think you can take all of us?" "I don't think," Owen said. "I know." The first shot rang out loud and sharp. Owen's rifle cracked the silence, sending one of the men sprawling into the dirt. The others scrambled for cover, shouting curses as they fired back. Bullets tore through the fence posts, splintering wood. Smoke filled the air. Owen ducked behind a wagon, reloading fast. The world shrank to sound and instinct. Gunfire, the kick of the rifle, the metallic taste of adrenaline. When the dust settled, only 2 men remained standing. They hesitated now, eyes darting toward their fallen companions. Owen stepped out, rifle steady. "Get off my land," he growled. The leader spat blood, glaring. "This ain't over." Owen didn't blink. "It is for you." Another shot cracked through the morning, echoing through the valley. Then silence. When it was over, Owen's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd done. The sun was rising now, casting light over the scene. It glinted off spent shells and the blood that stained the frost. He lowered his rifle and whispered, "It's over, Eva, you're safe now," but deep inside, he knew safety was never that simple. Eva found him sitting on the porch hours later, his hand still trembling slightly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The smoke of battle had cleared, but something lingered, a heaviness in the air that only comes after violence. She stepped closer, her voice soft. "You're hurt." He looked down at his arm, grazed by a bullet, blood seeping through his sleeve. "I've had worse," he muttered. Lila ran out from the cabin then, her eyes wide. "Is it over?" Owen nodded slowly. "It's over, sweetheart." The little girl wrapped her arms around him, squeezing tightly. "You saved us," she whispered. He didn't know what to say. For years he'd lived believing his life had ended with the loss of his family. Yet here he was, holding a child who looked at him like he was something more than a broken man. Like he was a hero. That night the three of them sat by the fire. Eva's head rested against the back of the chair, exhaustion in every breath. Lila fell asleep with her hand curled in Owen's. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, quiet, forgiving. Owen stared into the flames, thinking of all that had happened. He'd taken lives to protect others. It wasn't pride he felt, it was sorrow mixed with peace. Because sometimes goodness doesn't look like mercy, sometimes it looks like standing your ground. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "I didn't just save you two," he said, more to himself than anyone. "You saved me." Eva's eyes met his, glistening in the firelight. "Then maybe that's how it's supposed to be," she said gently. "Sometimes we knock on the wrong door, and it turns out to be the right one after all." Outside, the snow fell thicker, covering the traces of the fight, the footprints, the blood. By morning, the land would look untouched, pure again, but for Owen Callahan, nothing would ever be the same. The night deepened into a heavy silence. Only the faint ticking of the old wall clock filled the room. Samuel sat across from Clara, his weathered hands folded on the table. She looked fragile beneath the glow of the lantern, pale, exhausted, but awake. "Doc says you'll pull through," Samuel said softly. "But you need rest." Clara nodded weakly. "You didn't have to help us, Mr. Harrow." He leaned back, his gaze steady. "Couldn't turn my back on a little girl knocking at my door?" Her eyes lowered. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into." Samuel frowned. "Try me." Clara hesitated, glancing toward the window as if expecting someone in the darkness beyond. "They weren't just some drunks," she whispered. "They're the Crawfords. They run everything down in Marrow Creek. The debts, the land, the sheriff himself." Samuel's jaw tightened. He knew that name. Everyone in the county did. The Crawfords were a family of outlaws dressed in Sunday suits. Men who smiled in Dale Confessio errorized by moonlight. Clara's voice cracked. "I borrowed from them after my husband died. Just to keep food for Lila. They said I'd pay in work, but it turned into something else. When I tried to leave," she stopped, the words trembling in her throat. Samuel's eyes darkened. "They came for you." She nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "And they'll come again." Outside, the wind had turned wild, hurling dry snow against the windows. Rattling the shutters like a warning, Samuel stood, his broad frame shadowing the flickering light. "Let them come," he muttered. "They've taken enough from this valley." Clara looked up at him. "You don't understand. They don't stop." "If they find Lila—" "They won't," Samuel interrupted. "Not while I'm here." He went to the closet, pulling out an old rifle wrapped in cloth. It hadn't been touched in years. Dust clung to the barrel, memories clung to the rest. He checked the chamber, loaded it, and leaned it beside the door. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The storm outside raged harder, matching the war that had begun to stir inside Samuel. He walked to the window and stared into the night. The same kind of night he'd lost his family in. Long ago. This time, he promised himself, he wouldn't lose anyone. The first shot shattered the quiet around midnight. The sound ripped through the valley, echoing off the pine ridges. Samuel grabbed the rifle and blew out the lantern. The fire cast wild, trembling light as shadows danced across the walls. "Lila," he whispered sharply, "get under the table. Don't make a sound." The little girl obeyed instantly, clutching her doll close. Clara reached for her daughter, but Samuel motioned her back. He peered through the window. 3 figures, moving fast through the snow, carrying lanterns and guns. The Crawfords. Samuel's heartbeat slowed. His instincts, buried under years of quiet living, came alive again. He waited, calm, deliberate, until one of them kicked the door open. A man stepped inside, slick-haired and sneering. "Evening, old man. We're looking for a woman and her brat. You seen 'em?" Samuel didn't move. "Turn around and walk out," he said evenly. The man grinned. "Or what, you'll shoot?" "Only once," Samuel said back and pulled the trigger. The blast lit the room, the man dropped instantly, and chaos erupted. The next few minutes were thunder and fire. One of the Crawfords fired back through the window, shattering the glass. Samuel ducked, rolled behind the couch, and returned fire. The sound roared through the cabin like a storm. Clara screamed as a bullet struck the wall inches from her head. Lila whimpered beneath the table, covering her ears. Samuel fired again, hitting the second man square in the leg. The outlaw fell, cursing, and dragged himself behind a wagon outside. Then, silence. Only the moan of the wounded man and the harsh wind through the doorway. Samuel rose slowly, his breath heavy. He stepped outside, rifle raised, scanning the snow. The third man was gone. Tracks led toward the woods. He knew what that meant. "He's going for help," Samuel muttered. Inside, Clara clutched her daughter tightly. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "They'll burn this place down." Samuel looked back at them, his voice hard but calm. "Not tonight," he said. "Not while she's still breathing." He closed the door, reloaded his rifle, and sat by the window, eyes fixed on the dark tree line, waiting. By morning, the storm had eased, leaving the valley wrapped in a strange stillness. Smoke curled from the chimney, rising into a sky painted pale gray. Inside the cabin, Samuel hadn't slept a minute. He sat by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the horizon. His eyes were tired but unbroken, a man who had seen death yet refused to let it win again. Lila stirred softly in her mother's arms. Clara brushed a hand through her child's tangled hair, whispering a lullaby too faint for Samuel to hear. For a fleeting moment, the cabin felt like home, fragile, borrowed peace between two storms. Then the distant rumble of hooves shattered it. Samuel stood, shoulders squaring. Through the frosted glass he saw them. 5 riders this time, not 3. The Crawfords had come back. Clara's breath hitched. They brought more men. Samuel turned, his voice steady. "Take Lila, go to the root cellar. Lock the hatch and don't come out until I say. But I'll handle it." He loaded the last of his shells, the metallic click echoing like a heartbeat. Outside, the riders spread out, circling the ranch like wolves. Their leader, Malcolm Crawford, tall with a scar carved across his cheek, dismounted first. "Samuel Harrow," he called out, his voice booming. "You killed my men last night. You think you can hide that woman here and get away with it?" Samuel stepped out into the cold, coat flapping in the wind, eyes steady as stone. "You've had your way in this valley for too long, Malcolm. It ends here." The men laughed, but not for long. Samuel fired first. Gunfire erupted, cracking across the frozen field. Samuel moved with deliberate precision. Every shot measured, every step grounded. The Crawfords fired wildly, bullets tearing through fence posts and dry boards. Samuel dropped one, then another, but a stray bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He fell against the porch, teeth gritted, blood soaking his sleeve. Inside, Clara could barely breathe. Each gunshot outside was a dagger to her chest. She held Lila tighter, praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening. Then came silence, the kind of silence that presses against the soul. Clara waited, tears streaking her face until she couldn't bear it anymore. She pushed open the cellar door and stepped into the light. Smoke rose from the snow. Bodies lay still. And there, at the edge of the porch, Samuel stood, barely upright, rifle hanging from his hand. Malcolm Crawford lay motionless at his feet. Clara ran to him, catching his arm as he staggered. "You're hurt," he smiled faintly. "Not the first time." His knees buckled, but she held him, trembling. Behind them, the sun broke through the clouds, its light cutting across the field like redemption itself. Samuel looked toward it, then at her. "You and Lila. You'll be safe now." Clara shook her head, crying. "We're safe because of you." He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling the weight of years, and for the first time in forever he looked at peace. Everything weeks passed. Snow melted, giving way to soft grass and clear skies. The valley felt different, lighter, freer. The Crawfords were gone, their reign of fear ended by a man who never asked to be a hero. Clara and Lila stayed at the ranch. Together they rebuilt what the storm, and the world, had broken. Samuel's shoulder healed slowly. He spent mornings teaching Lila how to feed the horses and evenings on the porch, listening to Clara hum while the sun sank behind the hills. There were no grand words between them, no promises. Just the quiet understanding of people who had seen darkness and were in chosen light anyway. One afternoon, as the golden hour bathed the ranch in warmth, Lila came running, her laughter echoing through the yard. "Mama, Mr. Harrow's teaching me to whistle." Clara looked up from the laundry, smiling through tears she didn't bother to hide. The ranch that once echoed with loneliness now rang with life, and sometimes, when Samuel stood at the same old door where it had all begun, he'd hear that faint memory, a knock, trembling and desperate, the knock that reminded him what it means to still have a heart, the knock that made him human again. If this story touched your heart, dear friend, please take a moment, like this video, share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness still exists, and subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes one knock at the door can save more than a life, it can save a soul.